Hi, everyone. Welcome to our attendees and our panelists. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I'm Katie Sandoval-Clark, FLY's Vice President of Development, and we are so excited to kick off the Movement for Justice series with you tonight. So last year, when the pandemic was dragging on, FLY went to our board members and we asked them how we could engage our current and prospective supporters virtually, how we could keep people involved and connected with the work that FLY is doing. I suggested a trivia night or a cooking class on Zoom and any number of other ways to bring people together. And one of our board members, June Wang, who is now our board chair, encouraged us to do a little something different. She said, with the state of the world and the racial justice reckoning and the pandemic, people are looking for ways to learn from credible sources about issues like juvenile justice and the school to prison pipeline, and how we can create a more just and equitable future for our youth. And so the concept of Movement for Justice was born. It's a space for FLY to share with you and answer your questions about the pressing issues our youth and our communities and our systems partners are facing, and how FLY is getting involved and really equipping our youth to use their voices to create positive change. We have a wonderful group of panelists to talk about the state of youth justice tonight, and I will pass it to FLY's fearless leader, our president and CEO, Ali Knight, to tell you more.
Thank you, Katie. And thank you all for joining us today, the first of the Movement for Justice series. For the next hour, we'll spend some time talking about juvenile justice in the state of California. We'll focus on one major law change at the state level that promises to have deep and profound impact on the state's 58 counties. We'll talk about Senate Bill 823, Juvenile Justice Realignment. But first, I want to provide a little context. In the US, almost 200 children are arrested each day. In California, we incarcerate more youth than any other state in the country per capita. In some parts of the Bay Area, we spend as much as $500,000 to lock up one young person for a year. We continue to have a crisis around pushing kids out of their homes, their schools and communities, and into the justice systems. And when you look at who these 2,000 young people are, you see FLY's kids, youth of color, those living in poverty, living with disabilities, LGBTQ, gender nonconforming, and trans youth subjected to neglect, abuse, trauma, or other forms of violence, and those in foster care. They make up a steady pipeline from failing schools and under-resourced communities into youth incarceration and eventually adult prison. We have a lot of work ahead of us to bring about justice and equity for them and to eventually dismantle this pipeline. Fortunately, at least in our state, the movement for justice for young people is growing. FLY is lending its 20+ years of youth service to joining others to effect change and seek justice. Elected officials, community advocates, and youth leaders all across California are coming together to push for reforms that center the needs of young people without compromising public safety. We are in a unique moment to reimagine juvenile justice in California, which brings me to Senate Bill 823, or formerly called the Juvenile Justice Realignment. SB 823 was signed into law last year in 2020 and is the result of a decades-long battle to close the youth prison system in California. In 2019, the year before SB 823 was signed, the Division of Juvenile Justice, or DJJ, admitted 750 young people into their 3 facilities. About 90% of those young people were Black or brown, and 85% of them were under 21 years old. The DJJ facilities have historically represented the worst incarceral experience of young people in the state of California. The longest periods of incarceration, sometimes in solitary confinement, hundreds of miles away from their communities, their families, and with very few services that prompt rehabilitation or positive youth development. Thanks to juvenile justice realignment, youth are no longer being sent to these prisons as of July 2021, and the facilities will be closed by July 2023. But the law also represents a major shift in the state's approach to juvenile justice. DJJ as an agency is being closed, and a new Office of Youth and Community Restoration is being established. This marks a shift from punitive approach to juvenile justice to a restorative one. It's been called a historic reform measure intended to fundamentally transform the way the state and its counties approach juvenile justice. The reimagining is happening, but now comes the hard part, building something new. The responsibility for implementation, the opportunities for reform is moved downstream to the 58 counties. FLY is on the leading edge of this work in 3 of our operating counties. Our staff and young people are serving on committees that will be making the key decisions on how funds will be used to see that juvenile justice realignment is carried out as intended in a way that creates community-based alternatives and promotes services that promote justice and safety. When we talk about systems change here at FLY, this is what we've been talking about. And to give you a sense of what change this can look like, I want to introduce our esteemed panel for the rest of today's talk. First, the Honorable Patrick Tondra. After 17 years of service in the Santa Clara County Courts, including serving as the presiding judge of juvenile court, Judge Patrick Tondra retired in 2019. A champion for juvenile justice beyond the bench, Judge Tondra has partnered with FLY in many ways, including being the visionary behind the court-appointed Friend and Advocate, or CAFA mentor program that now supports youth on probation in Santa Clara and Alameda counties. We're fortunate enough to also have Judge now serve on FLY's board of directors, and he co-chairs the Systems Change Committee to provide leadership and judicious, all puns intended, judicious support on FLY's legislative advocacy efforts. Welcome, Judge Tondra. Second, Cassidy Higgins, FLY's Vice President of Community Impact. Cassidy joined FLY in 2014 and has held multiple leadership roles focusing on growth and innovation for FLY to achieve impact on not only our young people, but on our systems partners in our communities. Cassidy most recently has spearheaded FLY systems change work over the last 2 years, and she's been helping building a foundation for advocacy partnership at the local, state, and national levels. Welcome, Cassidy. Thirdly, I want to welcome Nick Jasso, FLY's Youth Voice Policy Coordinator, a former FLY youth who has been an active spokesperson for FLY and a mentor to other youth to leverage and use their voice since 2014. Some of you may remember Nick from his dynamic speech at our showcase event that year, 2014. Since then, while earning his degree in sociology from UCLA, Nick interned with the California Assembly member, Wendy Carrillo, where he researched police officers on school campuses and their effects on Black and Brown students. Nick has also served as a youth commissioner on the San Mateo County Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Commission. Welcome, Nick. Thank you all for being here today. Now, I have a few questions for each of you. We also want questions from the audience. So if you have questions that come up during our talk, please submit them in the Q&A function and not the chat, so that we can make sure we capture them and try our best to get to it. Excellent. Are we ready? So I want to start with you, Judge. How are you, Judge?
I'm good. I'm
good. Glad to have you here with us.
Glad to be here.
Great. So you've been, as noted, you've been a judge for over 17 years. And when you retired, SBA 23 was an idea with the possibility of being a reality, but none of us were sure that we'd actually get to this point. Well, now we're here. What do you think about the closure of the facilities? More specifically, what does this mean for young people? And how might this change the way the courts and the juvenile justice system operates?
Well, that's a great question, and that's a big question. I think to try to understand how significant this is for our kids and for the court, you have to back up a bit and take a look at what things were like and what the process has been to get us where we are today. When I came on the court, it was September 1st of 2007, and there were 10,843 kids in 11 juvenile prisons in California. Now, if you think about that, it's just hard to grasp. 11,000 of our kids were put in these state institutions, which were nothing really more than prisons. And different counties had different policies. Santa Clara County tended not to use the prisons. They tended to try to keep kids in the community, but there were high-risk kids that sometimes had to go to the department. Other counties, would send 75 a year. Some counties, they'd send, if you got arrested for auto theft and they didn't have the resources in their county to deal with it, they would send them off to the Department of Juvenile Justice. And so when I came on, there was a stack of reports on my desk that were quarterly reports by a special master about the Department of Juvenile Justice. And I kind of wondered what this was all about. It turns out that in 2002, the Prison Law Office filed a major lawsuit against the state of California over the conditions at the Department of Juvenile Justice. And they alleged widespread abuse and neglect. And there was horrible things going on. Kids being kept in cages while they were in class, kids being taunted by counselors, teens committing suicide. And ultimately, within a year, there was a consent decree and a special master was appointed. And that special master basically would look at the conditions in the facilities and see whether they met up with regulations and constitutional standards. And between 2003 and 2016, they wrote quarterly reports in which basically there was continual problems in the institutions. Ironically, the district attorney's office didn't want me to read those reports because they thought it would influence whether I would send a kid to the department. But of course, there's actually a statute that requires judges to know the facilities and institutions that they're going to send their kids to. But it was for me a real struggle over my obligation to protect the community when I had really high-risk kids, and the fact that these institutions were not really good institutions for kids. As the lawsuit progressed, a number of things happened, including in 2007, we had the first realignment in which, for the first time, we limited the number of kids. The legislature did, the number of, and the kinds of kids, the type of kids that can go into the state system. And then a couple of serious organizations came along, the Little Hoover Commission and the Legislative Analyst's Office, all within a couple of years, took a look at this and said, we need to stop spending good money over bad institutions. We should just close down these prisons and keep the kids in our community. The lawsuit itself got dismissed in 2016 because the judge found that that the institutions had met minimum standards. But really, the juvenile justice communities were very concerned about that. They were very concerned that they were going to go back to their old ways. And sure enough, they started to. The population started to increase. They started to even have contract discussions to build new state prison systems for youth. And the number of youth in the system had come down to 700 kids. But that wasn't because of anything the department was doing. That was because essentially crime took a nosedive during those years, and the legislature limited the number of kids that could go there. So that we ended up with a general 700 to 750 population. This is all in the face of national studies that said, you want to rehabilitate your kids, you need to keep them in your communities. The success rates are much, much higher. So I retire, and shortly thereafter, AB 823 comes along, and there's a decision to close the Department of Juvenile Justice and send these kids, or keep these kids, back in our counties. Surprisingly, when that happened, even though philosophical, the juvenile court judges were behind it, there was a great concern about how that was going to be implemented. It was sort of like when the President of the United States withdrew from the agreement with Iran over nuclear weapons. The question then is, well, what comes next? And there was a lot of concern about the judges about what was going to come next. Were we going to have sufficient monies to create the kind of services and programs and institutions at the local level to take care of these kids? Were we going to have the unintended consequence of having kids transferred into the adult system because we didn't have the kind of services to take care of the high-risk youth? We had the concern about the shifting population for kids not only up to the age of 25, but the high-risk kids, the highest risk kids, staying in our communities. And did we have the kinds of services and institutions to take care of them? And then overlapping all that, COVID-19 hit. And that really affected how people could work together. The big issue was, what are we going to do in terms of housing kids long-term or longer term that are high risk and but need a secure institution? If you were convicted of a 187, a homicide, typically you went up to the Department of Juvenile Justice for 5 years. If you take that kid locally, are we going to put them into a one-bed small unit in juvenile hall for 5 years? I mean, developmentally, that's torture for a kid. We can't send them to the ranch because the ranch isn't a high security facility. So the big $64,000 question still in Santa Clara County is, how do we produce the kind of institution that can take care of these real high-risk kids? I think I'm probably running out of time, but let me quickly end on a note that says the positives way outweigh the negatives. I'll save my positives for a later question in our meeting here today, but let me quickly talk about my very first trial in juvenile justice court. And it involved a kid who had committed a really serious crime against a woman. And they wanted me to send the kid to the Department of Juvenile Justice. The kid was immature, small, unathletic, serious mental health problems, a little bit weird. He was a perfect target to be bullied at the department. So I had to decide, am I going to send this kid up there or am I going to do something else? I decided that I thought the kid would end up just being red meat and life would be hell for him. And so I made a decision to keep him here in the county. It was quite controversial at the time. We didn't quite know what to do. I ordered the department to find me services. They came together with the behavioral health department and we provided meaningful services. It was a template for how those two organizations could work together. And that kid successfully graduated from probation without any further involvement in the law.
Thank you so much, Judge. And I want to quickly reiterate what I heard. And we will make time to talk a little bit about what are the sort of trade-offs and what this means for us at the local level. But so I heard a couple of things. I heard that the numbers have drastically dropped down from almost 11,000 in 2007 when you started to now about 700. And that's through no effort of the actual state facilities, but mostly through probably local practices and crime trends. And you talked a little bit about Santa Clara County in particular, really thinking about like what's the best way to rehabilitate a young person? Is it to sort of have them in this facility that is on record of being harsh and punitive and not being healthy or safe for the kids, or coming up with creative solutions in the community? And you gave us an example of that, which was controversial at the time. So thank you for that, Judge. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I want to shift to Cassidy now. So Cassidy, you've been knee deep in this for FLY. You've been leading our efforts and figuring out how we can be responsive in this moment, how we can affect change on behalf of the young people and the communities and our partners. I'd love to hear from you. What opportunities do these closures open up for youth, for our communities, and for FLY?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Ali. We are seeing a ton of opportunities opening up in front of us as a result of this shift in legislation. Particularly for youth, we're seeing the opportunity for them to stay in their communities, closer to home, closer to their support system. And if they don't have any support systems, there's the opportunity to actually develop them in the community versus experiencing pretty significant transitions around supports. There's a lot of challenges when you think about a young person who lives in San Jose and they're being sent to a facility in Stockton away from that community. And while services exist in that facility, they get disrupted whenever a young person then returns back to the community and has to build new connections upon reentry. So if they stay in their communities, the reentry transition causes less disruption to their support systems. And even better, if we can find alternatives to incarceration altogether, we can have young folks stay in the community and not need to experience a transition at all, but rather really find the strengths that already exist and build on those strengths so that we are keeping young folks in the spaces where they're most likely to thrive. For the community, we think this means that we get to, what we know this means is we get to maintain and keep the very powerful and important youth voices that really support us in transforming and building that community. We know that young people and their experiences are assets to our communities. Just look at our incredible Fly youth as examples if we need any. And when counties really leverage these assets, or when counties lose these assets and send young folks to state facilities, they lose the insight of that lived experience and also the ability to glean innovative ideas and solutions for addressing some of the key barriers that exist in those communities that reinforce that pipeline to prison. And then finally, for Fly, we've really seen this as an opportunity to spread and scale our work that we've done as this shift happens. And so as you mentioned at the beginning, Ali, we are supporting the work in all of our current communities. And also we've been able to support some of the work through our technical assistance in Contra Costa County. And what we've learned in kind of observing how each of these 4 communities are approaching this is that there really truly is an opportunity to reimagine what services and support look like for transition-aged youth in communities. And we are seeing a particularly visionary leader in Contra Costa who has called upon us to really assess what kind of transition-age youth services already exist and where are the gaps and how can we support and come alongside that community and this visionary leader to fill some of those gaps and really see this not just as an opportunity to address and support young people who would go to DJJ, but also to overall improve services for transition-age youth and disrupt that pipeline to prison.
Thank you so much. I love it, Cass. So a couple I want to try and connect 2 dots from one thing the judge said and something you said. So when Judge gave us a little bit of sort of like the historical context, he talked about how Santa Clara County dealt with what they knew was, a rock and a hard place. You've got a young person, it's high risk to the community. You've got a facility that's disconnected and pulled away from that person's resources or network. That's quite honestly not good for the young person either, potentially not safe. And so what we saw, I think, is that different counties operating differently as it relates to the Division of Juvenile Justice. Some counties using it as the way to sort of manage, young people that they don't have resources in the community. Some counties saying, we're not going to send young people there, we're going to deal with it internally. And then what we saw is like just different levels of admissions from counties. And so Contra Costa County is one of the counties where I think when we talk about young people coming back when the facilities are closing, they're going to be one of the counties that has the most youth. LA is up there, Sacramento's up there. Contra Costa is one of those counties that's going to have a significant number of young people return back to the community. So that community now has to figure out what does it need to do to support these young people that were previously served in these facilities. The other thing that I know that's important here, that, is that counties now need to figure out how to use these resources to build something different. And so these local action plans are an important opportunity to say, well, if we're not sending them to these kiddie jails, as people like to call them, what are we going to do to meet their needs that the judge called out, like everything from mental health needs to housing needs, the different things that you now have to sort of contend with as a county. So I want to connect those 2 points. Move to my next question for you, Cass. We're all optimistic and we're all hopeful, but we also need to be mindful of what are some of the unintended consequences of this shift. What are you seeing and what should we be thinking about as it relates to these unintended consequences?
Yeah, I think that there are certainly, like, this is an exciting move, and it also, we can't just let it happen. We have to be really intentional about how we manage some of the things that can happen, the unintended consequences that you're alluding to. And some of those unintended consequences include things like net widening. Whenever a change happens, there's potential for more young people to be sucked into the system or incarcerated. And so we need to be really mindful that this shift really is used to take a step forward and doesn't pull us back by pulling more young folks into the pipeline. We also need to make sure that this move doesn't mean that more young people are filtered into the adult system, because counties don't have the will and the capacities to support young people within the juvenile system. And so we want to make sure that just because there's nowhere to send the older youth now, that they don't then end up just saying, well, let's just kick them out of the juvenile system and put them right into the adult system. And then finally, we also need to acknowledge that there's still a gap. Even with this legislation, there are a significant number of 18 to 25-year-olds who maybe got charged at the age of 18 or 19 who aren't eligible for what's happening with this shift for Senate Bill 823. And so we still have more work to do, because the whole premise is that there is a different developmental stage that's going on for these young folks. And so we need to acknowledge that we still have to keep moving forward and making sure that we take it all the way, and that all young people 18 and 25 have this opportunity to be responded to by the system in a way that actually acknowledges that developmental phase. And so, and in doing so, we also need to acknowledge the difference in rights between the adult system and the juvenile system. So for example, juveniles don't have certain rights to things like a jury. And so in making all of these moves, what we really need to be careful about is that we are not removing rights that people have, but rather building in more support to respond to the unique needs of this phase in life.
I love it. Thank you so much. I'm going to now move over to Nick. Nick, how you doing, buddy? There you are. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you.
So Nick, you represent such a unique perspective, not just as a young person who's come up through FLY, really sort of representing youth voice its earlier stages, but because you played a significant role in capturing youth voice, young people's voices who are actually in the facilities now. You were part of the efforts to run a group of focus groups with young people in the facility in Stockton to get a better sense of what they might need when they return home, to inform service delivery and programs in this local action plan. Could you start by telling me a little bit about what that was like? I know that you guys did the focus groups during COVID, during the pandemic, when we couldn't be in person, and you were sort of interviewing young people who are further isolated, not just because they're removed from their homes, but now they're sort of in a prison, youth prison during COVID. So say a little bit more what that was like.
Yeah, so I want to start off by being really rooted in the fact that FLY really believes in the power of youth voice. And we believe that young people are experts on their lived experience, right? So when it comes to being tasked with making changes to DJJ or to knowing what comes next, we were sure to reach out to young folks that were actually incarcerated in the Department of Juvenile Justice right now. And what that looked like is we were on Zoom, right? We met with 3 different units on multiple occasions, and 5 to 8 youth in every unit. The youth were like fanning themselves, eating popsicles. It was real hot in Stockton. But we were still able to connect with the young folks. And I think something that was really striking for me was there was one young man in particular who mentioned that he had a conversation with a lifer, someone who was serving a very long time in prison, a lifetime sentence. And in that conversation he had with him, he was asking him questions, and he said that the time that he spent in DJJ messed him up forever, that he was never getting out of prison, that the trauma that he gained there and the institutionalization that he received there, it sent him on that track for the rest of his life. And so for me, and I'm sure for the other folks that were there, that were holding these focus groups, it created a real sense of urgency, because we weren't just dealing with these young people or with the plans coming forward, right? We have their future in our hands, right? And we have to make sure that we're being really intentional and that we're really following their lead in what they need.
Yeah, that's so powerful, Nick. It's funny, and I know we talked about this before, about in a lot of ways that is like an illustration of the pipeline to prison, right? Someone who's doing life, being able to pinpoint at what point in the system where they felt like things changed for them. And it's pretty sad, but powerful. It's also almost like the inverse of the Fly Fountain story, right? Where we talk to young people and we're like, what will have made this different? Let's build that in. And so I can't help but draw the parallels to that story, almost birthing something new for us through this opportunity we have. So thank you for that. And I know we're short on time, so I want to get to my second question for you, Nick, which is that I know that the focus groups was certainly for Fly's learning, but also for the field, right? We wanted these stories, the voice of these young people to inform, how the 3 counties that we operate in are sort of developing their plans to support these young people who are returning back, or young people who they won't be sending to the facilities. Could you tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing with that feedback that you got through the focus groups and what's next?
Yeah, so I think it's funny. I'll tell another quick story. There was another youth in one of these focus groups who said, he was like, "Hey, I'm 21 years old. I'm a grown man, but I don't know how to be an adult." He was saying how he's been incarcerated since he was 16 and he has no idea how to get a job, hold a job. He doesn't know how to do laundry, how to pay bills, all these things that make it, all these seemingly simple tasks that you learn through your young adulthood, right? That he had no idea how to do and are so important for you to be able to live on your own, right? And it's kind of simple, the things that these young people are asking for, right? They want life skills, right? They want skills that will directly go out and translate into the real world. Because there's a general sense of anxiety with being released, with not really having a plan or not knowing what's going on the outside, right? They want vocational training. They just want to know how to navigate the outside world. And so thankfully, through these meetings and through these recommendations that we gained from these young people, Fly was able to give out 5 recommendations from these. There are a lot of recommendations, but 5 main recommendations that then Santa Clara County has adopted and are using them in their county plans, and will submit them to the state as well to be a part of the statewide plan. And what they want is they want youth voice present at all stages of this process, right? They want to be included. They want their voices to be heard, right? They want the healing to be asset-based. We want connections with families. We want community and constructive use of time, right? We want it to be restorative. They want the behavior management to not be punitive and for it to be strength-based, so they're not losing privileges if they get into trouble one time and being reset to ground zero, right? They want culturally relevant staff and healing and responsive training, right? And they want accountability for not just the staff, but also for themselves as well. But they want accountability for staff as well to hold these things up. And so it was really quite simple, but you just have to ask them.
I love it. And it's funny how you get the simple intuitive answer as long as you ask the right question and the right person, right? And in this case, young people. This is awesome. So I know we want to get to the audience questions. So I just had one question for the full panel. And if each of you, starting with you, Judge, can give us a 30-second answer, that'll ensure we have enough time to move to questions from the audience. So my question is, given that we are hopeful, we know that like the urgency of the moment is, I think, sort of created by a lot of things going on. Is there one sign, one sign of significant change that things will be better that you've seen since the bill has been signed into law? It's been a year. What would that one sign be? So in 30 seconds, starting with you, Judge, what's one sign that things will really change as a result of this bill?
Okay, I got 30 seconds, so I'm going to talk very fast. Cassidy talked about kids staying in the community. That means family, friends, and programs are here with you and stay with you, even if you get out of probation. We can deinstitutionalize. We've already done that at the ranch for our kids that didn't go to DJJ, where we adopted the Missouri model, where you have a dormitory rather than a prison. This all aligns with our brain science that we know that kids don't mature into adults till they're about 24 or 25. And this creates a real working opportunity in the way the funding was designed, that if you want to get money, you have to collaborate. You have to bring all the private and public institutions together to find the solutions. And that's what's being done. And that's a very positive thing.
Thank you. It's a great point. Cass.
Yeah, I think for me, like this absolutely can be a sign of significant change, but it requires a level of accountability and oversight for each of the counties in California, and that includes involving the community very heavily. There's been a lot of doubt about whether counties are willing and equipped to do this well, and we've really got to hold them accountable and highlight leaders who are taking this opportunity to create transformative opportunities for Tay in the juvenile system. We don't want this just to be something where it goes from all the atrocities go from being held at the state down into local communities instead. And so I think how we would know that this is a significant change is we would see incarceration rates continue to decline, and we would also see more young people who've been impacted by the justice system playing leadership roles and being at the table as communities evolve and adapt.
Yeah, thank you. Nick.
I think my answer is pretty simple. I think that a good sign that this is going to work, or I'm hopeful for the future, is that we're actually asking young people, right? And we're really taking their word and really allowing them to take the lead on a lot of this.
I love it. I love it. So at this point, we're going to open it up for questions. Now, Katie, I'm sorry. I know that there's some question. I see one question in the Q&A, but it looks like we got some other questions. Where should I go to get the questions?
Go ahead and use the Q&A, Ollie, and if any others come through the chat, I will put them in that Google Doc that we're sharing.
Great, thank you. So I've got a great question from Diana. With the current wave of crime throughout the Bay Area counties, do we really think that the political will exist to affect these types of changes for our youth, that will still be there to affect these types of changes?
So I think that's a really good question. I would qualify the question. I think that the primary rise in crime is handgun violence, and not in general, at least nationally. That's certainly true. Handgun violence is a big problem in many of our major cities, but crime in general, I don't think has spiked. Having said that, I think we have to pay attention to it. I do think that there are forces who are not comfortable with the changes that are being made in terms of the justice system, and would very much try to utilize the rise in crime as a pushback. And we have to be sensitive to that fact. And I think time will tell whether that is able to succeed.
Yeah. It's great. Thank you for that, Judge. Anyone else want to chime in?
I'll just add that I also think like what we're seeing is that crime's not getting better by our current system. So we need change if we want to change. And so I think that that's something to remember too, that that if the system was working, we wouldn't be seeing this wave of crime happen. And so to me, that even compels us more to really look at reimagining and shifting and really addressing some of the root issues that are causing some of these trends that we're seeing.
Yeah. I'll just add, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cass or Judge or Nick, that I do think that the uniqueness of the time of 2020, put an urgency to this in ways that I think, quite honestly, we have to capitalize on. I know that the governor ran on a platform of juvenile justice reform, and this idea of closing these facilities was very much part of his campaign. But I also know that in 2020 there was an economic argument for it, right? Given the costs, and so I say all of that to say that I do feel like there is a uniqueness of the time that we have to capitalize on in this moment. Like, I don't think we can get to 2023 without like some really out of the box thinking, or some really sort of like innovative ways of sort of meeting the needs of young people and also keeping communities safe. Because I think that we will be having a different version of this conversation again if we don't see progress. It's my belief. But great. So I see there's a question from Claudia. Great question. So DJJ is been described as an alternative for youth who have been involved in very serious crimes to keep them out of the adult criminal court. How should restorative justice advocates deal with this backlash of prosecutors increasing the amount of youth charged in adult court in response to SB 823?
So again, I think that's a really good question. It's true as a starting point that the ability of the district attorney to take a kid into the adult court is curtailed quite a bit from where it was a few years ago. But I think that the answer to the question is that we have to build the institutions and the services and programs that give the public a sense of confidence that we are still concerned about the community and community safety, and that we are going to take the kind of actions and build the institutions that will keep the community safe. And that's why I talked about that one of our big challenges here is how do we have institutions to keep kids who commit really, really serious crimes around for a while so that it satisfies the sense of safety of the community, and it keeps the district attorneys from feeling like they need to try to take that kid up into the adult system in order to protect everybody.
Great, thank you. We've got a couple of others coming in, so I'm just gonna move to the next ones. And this next question, I'm gonna ask Cass, you and Nick, the tech team. So June asked, what government departments and nonprofits are involved in designing the resources for youth coming back to the communities, from DJJ?
Yeah, this is a good question, and the answer is that it looks different at each county. The Senate Bill 823 did kind of say who needs to be involved in the process, but it does tend to be system heavy, and it's being led by probation. And so that is where kind of I'm talking about the need for community accountability, in that each county is supposed to have a certain number of community seats at a minimum. But we've been seeing that different counties have kind of been stepping up to those requirements differently, and whether or not they are authentically integrating community voice has been a point of contention in some of these spaces. And so, brief answer, it's really being led by probation, and then there are representatives from folks from like the Office from the Public Defenders, district attorneys, judges are involved, and then the community is also supposed to have a space, but that's been one of the struggles, is really making sure that that community voice is involved in playing a very heavy role in this process.
Yeah, and that's just, I think, a good point, a good example of how we're all optimistic about what this could mean, and we know that we can't take the shorter way to get there. Like, I mean, even if we think about the way, adult realignment played out almost 10 years ago, like, there are some communities that's going to be really sort of like bold and innovative in thinking about how to do this, and some communities are going to be like, this is going to be resources to do the things I've always been doing. And so we've got to really work hard to make sure youth voice, community voice is really playing some role in developing these local action plans. Anything you want to add, Nick? Because I know that So we've got a question from Stacy. It's also a really good question about sort of unintended consequences. So given the way counties are funded by SB 823, smaller counties will not have the same resources or housing opportunities as the bigger ones. I'm sorry, I just lost that as I was reading it. I find out what it is. Sorry. So do you see a transfer of serious at-risk youth to adults to be a likely result of the disparities in funding by county based on size? You see it?
So I'm happy to weigh in here. I have to say, unfortunately, I'm afraid that might happen. I am concerned, historically, the smaller counties didn't have the resources to even have a ranch program. That's why they utilized DJJ so much. And there is some opportunity built in for some regional services. And I'm not quite sure where everybody is on that. That might be able to be an alternative for the higher risk kids. But I am concerned that some of the smaller counties will revert to a system that, just gives into the transfer process and says, look, they got more resources to take care of the really high risk kids in the adult system. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I'm afraid, I'm concerned about that.
Thanks for that. It's a great question, Stacy. We've got another question here from Victoria. How do we get Santa Clara County to look at viable facilities instead of trying to just redecorate Juvenile Hall so that the youth are given an appropriate facility where they can grow into the citizens we want them to be? I just love the sort of aspirational tone of that question, Victoria. It's a great one. Anyone want to take that?
That's a very difficult question. I'm not personally involved in all the ongoing collaborative discussions about our institutions and how we're going to rise up. I don't know whether Cassidy is more involved. I know Fly is involved in some of that. So I don't want to just start speculating, but I think it's to take a program like our ranch program with the Missouri model, but modify it to create, the high security. You can walk away from the ranch, right? High security, you're not supposed to be able to walk away from. So it would have to be changed, but I don't want it to be an institution that's just a prison here at the local level. I want it to be, the best practices we know about institutions for youth. I'm not sure that answers the question.
Yeah, but I think it's an important one, right? I mean, I think every county is going to have its challenges, whether it be infrastructure, resources, its limitations of the vision or the political will, of the community, and it's an important one. So yeah. So I'm looking. I don't see that we have any other questions. I think that those are all the questions. I guess I have a question, just to double click off your point, Cassidy, about some of the blind spots that still exists even with this move. So we've got, to your point, we've got a majority of these young people will be teenagers or young adults. We've already have young people in these communities who are tried as an adult by virtue of age. But because of the nature of the offense and other sort of technical aspects of the way the system works, there isn't a lot for them. Where do you see, I think, some sort of opportunity for a more holistic way of sort of meeting the needs of this particular age group, given what we know about adolescent brain development?
Yeah, I think it's a balance between how we consider rehabilitation for adults and how we consider rehabilitation for juveniles. I think it's something in the middle. Like, we need to provide opportunities for young adults to try on their identities and the things that they're learning, but we still need to consider things like how do we support young adults who are still have close ties to their family? So how do we incorporate the family and take a holistic approach to the family structures being part of the solutions that we design? How do we approach things as strengths-based? When our brains aren't fully developed until our late 20s, that means there's still a lot of room for us to learn and figure out how do we develop those breaks that we need to have in order to really not just react to the things that we're experiencing. And so I think I don't know that we have what we need at this point. I think there is going to be this kind of radical reimagining that is about not saying that we need to treat transition age youth as we do young people under the age of 18, but it's also not about treating them like they're adults. And so really figuring out how do we take this nuanced, responsive approach that really comes along young people who are emerging into adulthood.
I appreciate that. So I will double click on that and say that in a lot of ways, there is sort of like a moment in I think a movement for this particular age group. Everything from SB 1004, I forgot what the latest number, when it was re-signed, what the second number was, but this idea that we wanted to pull a group of low level offending young people out of the adult system and provide service to them in the juvenile system, I think in a lot of ways seeded this idea that like we could be serving the slightly older transition age youth or give them access to services by virtue of age. I think the Elevate Youth Justice Act that I know didn't get passed also, I think in a lot of ways introduced this idea of raising the age of criminal responsibility. So it feels like this idea about understanding that young people, particularly young people in a transition age range, have some unique needs that we need to be really thinking about as a system and as a community. And so I really am excited about that. And I feel like SB 823, although it's very specific to a specific group of young people, I think it sort of moves, it continues that conversation in ways that I think could be great. Claudia, I saw that you had two other questions. I'm going to quickly say that I think your question around the DJJ, those awaiting placement, I can raise it to the group, but I'm also feeling like that's a very specific question to specific counties. And I don't know that I don't know that we can answer those questions here. I don't know. So the question, so I almost want to invite you to sort of talk with us offline and see if we could sort of like get some information to use. Certainly this question about Alameda County's, their realignment plan. I don't think that we have it. We might have, I think, so my point is I think that we can be a resource to you outside of today's webinar if possible. I want to get to Kevin's question. So is there a model for communities to follow in the development of services and programs for youth, their families, and a community? It seems education, prevention, and intervention are critical. I do believe that keeping youth in their community is critical, important, and yet, more of that question, sorry. And yet, how do we direct the attention of our communities? It's a great question. And I feel like you started talking a little bit about that, Judge, when you talked about the Missouri model and some of the things that we could adapt from what we're doing at the ranch in Santa Clara County. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I thought I saw a chat from somebody saying that the Missouri model's on the way out, and I can't find it here. That would be news to me. Yeah, so I talked about the Missouri model. I mean, the point of the Missouri model is to get away from the idea of cells and beds and cells with one or two people, and to create a home-like atmosphere in which you have, 6, 8, 10 kids in a more of a dormitory home with couches and chairs and beds and living facilities, and then build programs around that. Now, I don't know whether there's some, I can't find that email right now, so maybe I misread it, but that's the only model that I know. There probably are other models out there, and I'm not familiar with them.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, certainly, I think a lot of richness in the discussion and the questions here. I think sort of the walk away for this is, the thing to take away is a couple of things. One is that this there's a lot of reason for optimism. There's a lot of reason to believe that things can change, but there also has to be a lot of work that goes into making those changes, affecting those changes. Each county is going to be charged with doing that in a way that's responsive to the needs of its community. We believe that in all instances, the community, and particularly young people's voice, should play some role. And I also think that we also got to acknowledge that there probably won't be any easy one-size-fits-all answer. I think more than anything, I feel like this is the age of innovation, and we should be leaning into that. And so we're excited about what this means, but we also know that we're cautious that we don't want unintended consequences to mean kids not getting services or kids being put in other parts of the system that don't serve them well. So with that, I know we're at time. I'm going to pass it back to Katie, but I want to thank our panelists for weighing in and offering their perspectives. And thank you all for participating and asking these great questions.
Thank you everyone so much for joining us tonight. We just had a great time being with you, answering your questions, talking more about this movement for justice that we are all a part of. I wanted to tell you some other ways that you can get involved and continue to support FLY in our work. Please follow us on social media. We are available on all of these channels. And there is more information on our website, flyprogram.org, if you need more information. Also, if you had a question that didn't get answered, please feel free to email me, katie@flyprogram.org. I'm happy to connect you with resources. We also invite you to consider contributing to our Justice Prevails Fund. This is a $1.5 million campaign that we're running right now. We are almost there, but we need more contributions to get there. The current opportunity we have is a $50,000 challenge grant that matches your donation dollar for dollar. And we bring it up in this space because the Justice Prevails Fund really supports efforts like the one we were talking about here tonight. The fund supports youth voices for change, community responsive innovations, and statewide impact, and those efforts that FLY has to really create systems change through the voices of our young people. So please check out more information on the Justice Prevails Fund on our website, flyprogram.org, or email me. Feel free to email me at katie@flyprogram.org for more information about the Justice Prevails Fund. And finally, we hope that you will join us for our next Movement for Justice webinar. It's on Wednesday, November 3rd, just a few weeks from now, from 5:30 to 6:30 again, and it's on prioritizing school safety. So how do we keep our young people safe? How do we create a safe and inclusive environment for all young people in school, to keep them engaged in school and to keep them out of the school to prison pipeline? We thank you all so much for being here. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your night. Go Giants. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks.